Okay, and we're live. Welcome back, everybody. We are back again with Dr. Pete Patitsas. And today we're going to be talking about the few things that we didn't get to talk about in our last conversation. But those of you that don't know, This episode is brought to you by our Revo Report Patreon. Join our community to get first access to interviews, Bible study guides, devotionals, and prayer books for adults, youth, families, and marriages. Plus, resources on Christian living, leadership, sermon prep, exclusive Q&As, online Bible studies, and even one-on-one coaching or counseling. Visit patreon.com/VinceRevo and grow in faith and truth with us. ER doctor or emergency medicine doctor, family man, 4 kids, author of the Athos Diet. I'm actually in that fasted state right now. And so are you, I bet, right? Breaker fast.
The window hasn't opened yet for me today anyway, so I'm going a little bit, 2 more hours more. How about you? What's your window today? Do you have a mark in mind?
Yeah, it's so I'll probably around 6 or 7 so I can eat with the family, have dinner with the family. Yeah. And also, we have a giveaway. So all you need to do is subscribe to our channels. So link down below, it will be Dr. Pete's channel. Yes, we will be giving away the Athos Diet book. And so if you're a Christian, this is huge because this aligns with your spiritual life and also your physical life. And it'll affect everything else, your mental health, your energy levels. Some of you might have weight goals, and this is just a byproduct of that. But yeah, why don't we go ahead and get started? Pete, anything you'd like to say as we get into some of the questions that we missed last time?
Yeah, just a bridge to the audience from the last podcast that we had together, which was just a few weeks ago. It was really great. We talked for about an hour, and we described this unique tradition of fasting as it goes back to antiquity and is many times in the Bible. And some people take it seriously, others don't. But as we started to explore what fasting meant and why God would utilize that, given that the center of ourselves very well might not just be our brain, but also our enteric nervous system that lies in the intestine. We talked about the physiology behind that, the anatomy behind it, building this case that if you're really trying to make a movement or make a change in the trajectory of this ship, you need to know what drivers are the most key and the most visceral, most core. And we're making this argument that part of that core or that measure might be something to do with our digestion. And as we explored how our sympathetic nervous system is affected and energy levels and mechanisms of healing are turned on, we also concluded then with this very interesting study called the ACE study, where we recognize that if bad things can have a physical effect in terms of lifespan and future success of a child at a young age, what can good things do to the longevity of a child? And one of those things that I was recommending, given our discussion, was fasting. So maybe not in terms of the greatest severity that I'm recommending in the Athos Diet, but essentially saying that kids basically after the age of 7 should probably eat no more than 12 hours a day. And then going vegan in this sort of cycle of the church's liturgical calendar, which is basically Wednesday, Fridays, and some weeks leading up to big feast days, is not a bad thing. And proof is in the pudding. I did it myself at 7. I didn't admit, but at the same time, I wanted to emphasize that there's something very key about teaching a child who does not have the cerebrum of a 27-year-old or of an adult for us to say, hey, how do we teach a child what it means to be non-judgmental when other kids are eating? How do we teach a child to be patient when others are enjoying themselves in a certain way, to be disciplined when others are not, delay gratification, all these things? And given those lessons you learn viscerally through your core at a young age, what things can you feed in? What companies can you start? Projects can you begin? Friendships you can manage that are based on real things. All of this is a recipe for success in any endeavor. Why not start that as young as possible?
Yeah, that was brilliant. I was even talking to my wife about that in starting that with the kids. And I was talking about a delay of gratification and how that is big for kids these days who have instant gratification. We live in a fast food, watch whatever I want to watch in that moment, right? And I want to touch on what we were talking about just before we went live. And that's you were talking about diminishing returns. Because I think a lot of people are out there not only concerned about obviously diet and being healthy, but being healthy, being wealthy. And what were we talking about earlier about that?
Yeah, I think in general, we live in a society that really markets hyperbole. So we don't want to just want to know who the fastest guy in the town is or the fastest guy in the state. We want to know who the fastest guy is in the world, and we want to see him fly. And That's a
Yeah.
really unnatural sort of experience if you think about it. For millions of years, arguably, you probably were like the fastest kid in the village. You probably were the strongest guy in the valley, the best singer in the mountain pass, whatever you want to describe it. Like now we hear our samples all over the world, and we also tend to market products and tools towards that end. And when we talk about diminishing returns, I always like to make this funny example where if you like steak, you can get New York strip for $25 a pound. But if you really want a good steak, you can get Kobe beef for $250 a pound. The point is that New York strip isn't 20, I guess it would be 10 times, isn't 10 times less delicious than Kobe beef. It's maybe like percent less delicious at diminishing returns. So the money does not reflect the increase in satisfaction. And when we talk about salary, there was a study actually it was some time ago, over 10 years, but they basically said at that time, and I know things have changed, but add on whatever inflation you want to add on. But basically, if you made $75,000 a year in America 10 years ago, you were at par with happiness and satisfaction as people who made 5 times that. But who made half 75,000 was indeed half as happy. So at 75,000, that's the diminishing returns mark, where if you make more, yes, you're a little bit more happy, but there comes a diminishing returns with that. So if you can imagine making $500,000 a year, they're not 75%, or I guess you would say 8 times more happy than the guys making 75,000. And it comes with a whole bunch of baggage with it. But it's something to think about really in everything, because so much of American society, or Western society, I should say, is marketed towards being the 0.1%, really, and not just part of you're not just a tall guy. You have to be the tallest guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The recipe for absolute dissatisfaction, really.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the fact that it's not linear, I guess I could follow up in asking, how do you see this when it comes to health, or when it comes to just having those energy levels, maybe that you've experienced, or maybe that other people have experienced who have communicated with you going through the Athos diet? And so some people really I want to get to 5% body fat, but at some point also there's diminishing returns, right? I want to get to a healthy weight, not too much, and I think your body will regulate itself. One of the things I notice with fasting is that my body will regulate my weight if I do intermittent fasting, and it won't go lower than that. There's a limit. Is that something that you've studied in the past, or do you have anything to say about that?
Again, I think as we scale this up, let's say we had a whole Christian country that said, you know what, we're going to do fasting Jesus style, the proper Christian style. What would that society look like? And it would probably be a very healthy society with parents that live into their 90s who are clear of mind and are functional and are still helping out with picking up toddlers and might even make dinner for everyone. The opposite extreme, which is just so ironic, is we live in America now where we've given up on a lot of those practices of delayed gratification, and we love instant gratification. We want more of it as much as we can. It's like we might even demand it. And as a result, and I mentioned this before, but 100 million people in America have diabetes or prediabetes. There's a huge wave of people who, given the fact that so many have diabetes, who are going to have dementia. Some of them called dementia type 3 diabetes. There's just such a connection. And as the baby boomers do become senior citizens, and a lot of them are, and our ERs are packed, our hospitals are packed. I just posted an article today about bed shortages across the country. But essentially, we are having people who have become very high utilizers. Their youth and, let's say, good genetics are not keeping up with a bad lifestyle any longer. And as their age magnifies things, and we take this to scale, there's going to be big problems. Now, you might say, hey, the baby boomers, they're one of the wealthiest generations in the world. But the reality is that we spend $5 trillion a year in America alone on healthcare, and we're $37 trillion in debt, and we're paying, I think, nearly $1 trillion a year in interest. And that is a spiraling problem. You can't throw money at everything and solve your problem. There just aren't people, human beings and buildings to house every person that might need a dementia unit coming forward. And that's a scary thing. So if we stop talking about how do we get 1 million people out of the 8 billion in the world perfect health through expensive diets, and special tools and outrageous amounts of time dedication towards that goal or towards that goal possible. But a million people among 8 billion is like 1,000% and less than that. How
Yeah.
do we get 8 billion people? Or let's just talk about America for a second. How do we get 350 million people a certain baseline of health where we can sidestep 80 to 90% of disease? Of course, there'll always be congenital things, genetic things.
Mhm.
And that is very possible through something as universal and as meek and humble and Christian as fasting. And this is why I think something like the Athos Diet, which teaches the world proper Christian fasting, while it's a spiritual practice, it will save the country. It really will. And I think a lot of that starts with having the right expectations and the right framing of what we're after, because we're not trying to get everyone 5% body fat. What we're trying to do is make them
Right.
attractive to the house, make them functional, make them look like heroes to their kids, and then they can participate in a wide range of activities. And that's not a bad world. That's not a bad
Mm.
world.
Wow. I was just looking up some of the data here. And so I remember one of the things that you were talking about was that none of them had, when they did a study over there, 1,500 monks, none of them had lung cancer. And in the US, 53.2 out of 100,000 will eventually have lung cancer. This is annually. You also said that no colorectal cancer, or at least you were mentioning these types of cancers, none of them
Yeah,
reported.
it's really reduced. Yeah, with this
Yeah.
vegan diet, avoiding meat, essentially,
Mm.
these monks in particular, like colorectal cancer doesn't exist, prostate cancer doesn't exist
Yeah.
in any meaningful way. And that goes actually to countries as well. They don't have access to meat, which is interesting. I'm not anti-meat, but I do
Yeah.
think that is something to reflect on as we eat things that evidently over a lifetime will result in things like colon cancer. And I think it's 40% of all Americans will have cancer someday, statistically.
40%. Okay. Okay. And also, I don't know what the statistics are for dementia, but I think is one in three or one in four will have some form of neurodegenerative disease or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I'm not surprised if it is that high when you consider that a third of the country has dementia, and there's almost like a 1-to-1 correlation.
A
Oh,
third.
sorry,
Yeah.
the country has diabetes, and there's a 1-to-1 correlation with them eventually developing dementia. The problem of diabetes is that it affects every organ system in the body. So every cell is processed sugar, and that's what it's using usually for fuel, is going to be affected by having too much of that around. It's almost like gluttony for cells. You just are so overwhelmed with so much sugar and so much excess that you stop. Eventually, you have a problem regulating the signaling for that sugar. And that every cell in your body operates on sugar to some extent, or it can. And wherever there is cell, there's going to be a problem and demise. And when it comes to the brain, that means dementia.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And in over there where they were practicing, there were no cases of that, right?
So they have almost zero cases of neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease, and diabetes for that matter. And what's also interesting is that when you are in a fasted state, this molecule called BDNF goes way high and is upregulated. And that's interesting because those neurodegenerative diseases I just mentioned, all of those people have low levels of BDNF. So what's going on there through this process of fasting on a regular basis that allows these monks to sidestep all of that disease, and specifically ones that harm you at a late age? And it's also something to keep in mind too. This is a humble realization, but if you live till you're 80 or 90, you're spending most of your life in a middle age to older age state, just minute for minute. And so again, in our society, we like to praise and idealize and hone in on like the 18 to 29-year-olds, but the reality is we should be doing stuff in that marginal decade, let's say, so we're prepared to live where we'll spend most of our time, which is essentially a middle-aged person that's going to be a senior citizen for a very long time. But it matters.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't realize that if you're living until that age, you're going to be a senior citizen more than in your teens. One of the questions that I didn't get to ask you last time was, do you have any specific individual story whose life was changed with the Athos diet? Anybody that's written in, anybody that you've experienced, you've walked with or discipled and taught this to?
Yeah, actually, one person comes to mind. It was very early on after I published the book. This gentleman was about 400 pounds going into this 48-day Athos diet. And the reason he came to me about doing it was because his brother had just died like a year earlier. And his brother was in his late 30s. What did he die from? And what he died from was morbid obesity. This guy was the biggest human being I'd ever met. He was 800 pounds at times, and 800 pounds. And there was just such strain and stress on the system that eventually he went into heart failure that no one could aid or assist with. And he died in his late 30s, which of course is too young to die. He had children, but the brother of this patient, so that the surviving brother, is also suffering with weight problems. And he approached me about this diet. And so we did a very one-on-one sort of, I really walked him through the process. And he ended up losing, I think it was almost 50 pounds in days, which is pretty significant.
48 days.
Yeah, in 48 days. And what's so wild about it is the first thing I noticed as he was going through this process was that and I'm sure all of us fall into this, but like he drank sugary stuff all the time. Like he was a construction guy, so he was always sipping on tea. So yeah, you're getting some caffeine, but it's loaded with sugar. Okay, so we got rid of that. And then he started to realize, actually, he is snacking all day. And to sustain that weight, you need a lot of food. So just really by cleaning up his hydration and saying, hey, you really can't eat outside of this window, he had just dramatic weight loss, especially in the first week. It was really impressive. And then as we optimized his satiety with the right amount of protein and fat and really tried to lower the carbs, he was just really doing phenomenally for those 48 days and was truly losing a pound a day. I mean, his metabolism,
wow.
If you could, a quick math, 10 times, he probably needed about 6,000 calories a day to maintain that weight easily. We're cutting out probably 3,500 calories off of that a day. It's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat.
That's right.
He truly was losing probably a pound of fat every day that he was on that diet. And of course, the reality is once he was done losing that much weight, you might say, hey, that's phenomenal, but he still had more to go. But at least he was on a pathway where time was the only factor he had to keep extending. Now, the Athos Diet itself is presented as a 48-day fast to viewers and readers because it mimics Great Lent. It mimics Great Lent. That's the send-off. But the cool thing is when you get through 48 days, you end it thinking, gosh, I feel phenomenal. Like, why would I stop? Now, what I tell people, and again, this goes back to the wisdom, I think, of an ancient tradition, a 2,000-year-old tradition here. But the next day after Easter, you're doing intermittent fasting. You're staying active with walking, but you're eating meat now. You're getting your protein from a meat source. And then on Wednesdays, Fridays, you go back to vegan. But again, it's this wonderful paradigm shift that you can then utilize those themes and those tools and those principles for the rest of your life and continue to lose weight, or if that's the desired goal. Or for that matter, if you just want to keep the health benefit, where we can talk more about what those are, you can increase the amount of calories you eat during your eating window and maybe not necessarily lose weight, but you're still getting that clearing house of physiology every day.
Man, that is incredible. So he was 400 pounds, and in the first in the 48 days, 50 pounds. So over a pound a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
What were some of, I assume there were some initial challenges for someone like that who has to drastically shift their eating window. What was his eating window? What were some challenges that he faced in adopting it?
I think he started out closer to about 6 hours a day, but he very quickly adopted to 4. And what I told him the first 3 days was, during your eating window, don't worry about the macros so much. Just eat as much as you want so that you can feel like you got somewhere and that you get to that next window of eating, and just convince yourself that's possible. And of course, everyone the first day ends up overeating till their belly hurts. And then the second day, they can go less. And by the third day, we're really starting to optimize those macronutrients, which we hope people eat no less than 100 grams, of protein and no more. And one of the reasons that we recommend the carbohydrate minimization is that every human being, depending on their size, has about a pound or less, maybe a pound or less of glycogen. And that's basically stored sugar in your liver and your muscle tissue. What's also interesting about that is when you are not eating, you are essentially eating that glycogen first. And then eventually, if you clear all that out, you eventually move into ketosis.
Then you're burning fat now at that point.
Yes, now you're burning fat. But glycogen also is a huge carrier of water. So a lot of people lose that glycogen, and then they're basically peeing out all this water that comes with it in that metabolism. So they're going to lose some water weight as well. You could say, hey, is that true weight loss or not? I'm not sure. But the point is, though, is that you are clearing out old furniture. And so then when you hit that mark of ketosis, Glycogen's gone. The liver's cleared out. By the way, when you look at someone's liver who's an alcoholic and who has NASH, non-alcoholic steatosis of the liver, they look the same. But NASH is from overeating. Alcoholism is from alcohol. It's just a funny thing to me that you might look at a person and be like, oh my gosh, you must have been an alcoholic. Do you have a job? Do you have kids? I bet your family hates you. But we don't necessarily have that stigma against the obese, and we should. But it does look the same in terms of the anatomy of the liver. And sometimes you have to understand things in this way to be like, oh, alcohol is an addiction. Alcohol is a problem. It destroys your liver. You don't live as long, but so does obesity. And maybe it's something I should try to avoid. So anyway, you start burning all of that glycogen, and it's basically a reset for the liver, because you don't get non-alcoholic steatosis of the liver without it being built up with these old sugar stores that would never get cleared out. So what's cool about doing this every day is, in theory, you are clearing house of that old stuff. Look at any river that's not flowing, any pond that has no, let's get rid of that old stuff. Nothing stagnant is good for you. And so that's a wonderful ritual that you go through every 24 hours, and a nice way to avoid hepatic problems, fatty liver disease, basically.
Wow, I never realized that there was a possibility for that glycogen store to replenish, and that it had potentially health benefits of that.
Yes.
And the fact that the what is it called? The liver, the liver cirrhosis, or
liver,
fatty liver.
Yeah, when you start seeing signs of cirrhosis in the liver and it's not from alcohol, you can attribute it often to non-alcoholic steatoliver. So this kind of like stagnant state, fatty liver, usually it's from overeating. But in particular, and I think this is always interesting, when you reach for a can of soda and you're eating high fructose corn syrup, it's very fascinating. There's only a few types of sugars that have to be processed in the liver first before it goes elsewhere in your body. And fructose is one of those. And the liver is a toxin center. It takes everything from the gut and it processes it, makes it safe, and then sends it out to the rest of the body. Isn't it interesting that this sugar in particular, high fructose corn syrup, has to go to a detox center before your body can use it? And if you think about this evolutionarily, fructose is in all of fruit. It is, but fruit is seasonal. Fruit is in a skin. You have to peel it back. Try to make yourself a cup of orange juice in the morning and see how tired your hands are after about like the fourth orange. I think you need like 8 of them for a cup of orange juice. There that are really tasty, but like at least orange juice is orange juice. That's not high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is just another level of problem. And you can eat that every day with soda, and people do. And so interesting that like you think reaching for a beer is bad as you're drinking that all day. But man, people drink, what is it, 40 ounce Mountain Dews. I mean, from McDonald's, you know?
Right.
No, cool.
Wow. Growing up in church, we would obviously talk about how, you shouldn't get drunk. And yes, that's biblical. And so a lot would abstain from alcohol, right? And what was never discussed, though, was, hey, it might also be sinning against the temple of the Holy Spirit if you're pumping a bunch of this high fructose corn syrup inside you, and it's doing just the same amount of damage to the temple of the Holy Spirit as those other things that might be stigmatized already, right? Alcoholism, etc.
Take this story. I think it's a powerful one. So I met a lady in the ER once. She was in her mid-40s, dying of liver failure. And she was so confused that she couldn't talk to me about why she was there. She was encephalopathic, too much ammonia in her blood. Her parents gave the history. So I talked to her family and they said, oh yes, she's in liver failure. She has liver problems. She's an alcoholic. And I was like, oh, how long we always ask, how much do you drink every day? Is it liquor? Is it beer? What is it? And they said, he actually has only been an alcoholic since about 38. I thought to myself, wow, this is really strange, because most alcoholics start in their 20s, maybe in their late teens. It's one of the reasons we try to keep people from drinking, period, until a certain age. Lo and behold, wouldn't you find out that this lady used to be morbidly obese, and at the age of 30, gastric bypass, lost all the weight, and then started taking up drinking. And the reason I bring this up is spiritual connection there. This person had an addiction to food to cope with something, some vice. And then we mechanically prevented that from being a manifestation anymore. But then, given that we're human beings, we find another way to torture ourselves. And she alcoholism so severe that she died 8 years later. But what's so funny about this is, or strange, is that I told this story before to a few nurses that I work with. And I am not joking. In the half a dozen times I've told this story, usually there's someone in there that has an uncle or an aunt that followed the exact same pathway. Morbidly obese, got the gastric bypass, took up drinking, became an alcoholic. It's
Really?
what an interesting insight into spirituality from something that seemingly should be something about, I don't know, addiction, calories, food, obesity. There is definitely a link there. And again, why is fasting so powerful? Fasting's powerful because the same neurofibers, the same pathways that kind of stimulate our brains for the purposes of dopamine release and euphoria, et cetera, for addiction, for overstimulation, those are the same highways for food and for drugs. It's not really like a separate system. So if I can turn off and learn how to fast, again, the delayed gratification, the self-control, not following impulse from food, then I can do it for drugs. It's just the same exact stuff. It's so wild. Literally, as you learn self-control over reaching for your next slice of pizza, that might actually be also the same willpower, but maybe also anatomy for not reaching for heroin or other drugs.
Man, that's brilliant. Yeah, isn't that interesting how we'll give up one vice only to go into another sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I want to switch gears here for a second, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
You delivered, I don't know if this information is correct, that you delivered your last child yourself?
Yeah.
ER doctor?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
So I'm really curious about this. So you delivered your last child yourself as an ER doctor. I want to know how that unique experience affected you, number one, as a father, and number two, as a physician, and really how maybe it affected your walk with God and your spirituality.
Yeah, it's funny. My second daughter was born, or my second child was born before I went to med school. And there's different types of people, right? Some people want to be like right next to mom giving birth, behind the curtain. Like I was just totally cool with the whole thing. Like I just had no questions at all that this wasn't the most extraordinary thing I'd ever see. And so I participated in that regard, but I hadn't gone to med school yet. In fact, at that point in time, I didn't know that I was
see.
ever going to go to med school. So
Hmm.
eventually we had our third child. And at that point in time, again, I wasn't in med school. But when the fourth one came around and I was in med school, I was like, I'm not missing this opportunity. So luckily my wife was healthy. We had all the right screening to make sure that baby was positioned correctly with the ultrasound. And by the way, as an ER doc in residency, you're required to deliver so many babies just as a way to say that, hey, you're prepared. Because sometimes women don't make it to the L&D unit. They stop at the ER. But yeah, so I was able, thank God, privileged to deliver our last child, who was a daughter, and everything went just smoothly. I will say though, I've been in the ER where the Amish are showing up to my door and there's problems. And so I'm not trying to say that giving birth isn't natural. It is. I'm not trying to say that giving birth isn't beautiful. It is. But there is a risk you take when you don't have other tools and equipment around you. And a lot of women and a lot of children used to die at birth. Character Rasputin, he was this like
The Russian healer guy, or
that really led the czars astray. But anyway, he was one of 9 kids and he was only one of 2 that survived to adulthood. What a crazy world it must have been to lose your wife, to lose your children, and many of them in delivery. So I always just say this: when in doubt, as long as you own everything you decide, you can't lose. You can, but you can't lose it. The awkward part is when I'm in the ER and someone's rushing in with their quote unquote pretty much dying child, and now I got to do something. It's that thing more terrifying than being responsible for a child's life, truly, and an infant for that matter. It is the most sacred moment of every ER person's career, truly. No one wants an infant to die on their watch. I don't even care if the child was born with the most crazy anatomy in their heart possible. You never know that in the moment anyway. So anyway, I like I said, I just cushion that to say that I've taken care of a lot of Amish where it's either mother bleeding out or a child that has some respiratory problem they had to solve. And I've never lost anyone, thank God. But I always feel a little bit like you're playing with fire. Like fire now is burning me. And so I'm just a little like this micro resentful about it. But I did live my own baby and it went fine. And I also owned up to it. I was like, hey, I feel confident about it. I also had some training, but still. So yeah, that was a moment. And there's just nothing more natural, more beautiful than the birth of your own child. It's just extraordinary.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. I
Vince,
want to
where were
ask.
you? Where were you at bedside when you had your children? I should ask you that. Were you behind the curtain or where?
I was right there, and I would say that, man, you have some guts. I think a lot of fathers would say, "Yeah, you got some courage there," because a lot of us get really lightheaded, right?
Right,
And we're
right,
not
right.
even doing anything. But I was right there for both of them, yeah. And for our second one, the anesthesiologists, is that what they call them? They were just so busy that by the time it was time for the baby to come out, and it was really starting to come out fast, he wasn't available. And so
Uh,
they just did it localized. But yeah, she definitely wanted what's it called when
Sure.
yeah, she wanted the epidural, but yeah, I guess they were short. This is during COVID too. Our youngest is a COVID
Wow.
baby. And yeah, yeah, she squeezed my arm pretty hard for the second one. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but you got some guts though, man, to do it like with your own kid. That's incredible. I see you're active on Twitter. You're making time for these interviews. You wrote a book, The Athos Diet. You got 4 kids. You're an ER doctor. You're talking about how you just had those 4 shifts in a row, and your husband. How do you balance all of this, man?
No, thanks, Vince, for seeing a trend. It goes back to something we were just talking about briefly before we started the recording, but I like to adopt things and utilize tools that I can use in my life, like in my real life. And I try not to silo anyone's space or place from another. And what I mean by that, the great example of the opposite extreme would be this movie I watched about fasting called The Healer Within, Fasting, The Healer Within. Two Australian guys, handsome young guys, went on a 20-day fast, essentially a water only, lost a lot of weight, had some suffering, had some euphoria, all sorts of things. It was a fine documentary. But the problem with the documentary was that these guys like went off into some different part of Australia with an RV and particular tools and all this technology. And like it was the most exclusive, overwhelming experience that you could never use in your daily life. Yes, I have all this health benefit now, but like, how am I going to do that when I have to pay bills and take my kids to soccer and be there for my wife in the evening and all these different things? And so in that regard, I felt like it was more of a documentary, maybe for the most extreme categories of people who already have illness, perhaps, and need some quick recovery. So, by all means, maybe that's for them. But for
Mhm,
us in the world, on a daily basis, who are fathers and have roles in different capacities, I want a tool that I can integrate into my life. I want to lose weight, get healthier, have insight as I live. And I don't want to ignore my children. And this is something else that's worth mentioning, but I have met hyper professionally focused docs that have a child they don't talk about. Hey, you have these 2 daughters that play soccer. Tell me all about that. Oh, yeah. I didn't know you had a third child. What the hell happened?
mhm,
And you find this child has just been interesting. As you brought up an example earlier of a middle child. This
mhm,
was also a middle child in and out of psych wards, major psychiatric illness, and such a
mm,
difficult topic to bring up in a guy who's a doctor who presents himself as so successful, but can't
mhm,
even his own son as a result of what I would say is some type of neglect. Now,
mhm,
necessity requires fathers to go out and do the right thing, and they're gone. I'm sure
right,
this situation is justified, but I think that there's certainly a case for quality over quantity of time. There are definitely ways
mm,
to screw up if you are around a lot. I definitely think that even the most high quality 30 minutes might not justify a lifetime of being missing, you know? So, even so both extremes are not good, but there is a balance there. And I say this not as like someone who just assumes this is normal, but thank God every summer I actually take my kids to Greece for 2 weeks and we have the most wonderful one-on-one time together where the agenda is just to spend time. Now, again, as an
mm,
ER doc, I work a lot of intense shifts and hours, but I actually end up working less days than the average person just because I knock out all my hours in a condensed amount of time. So I like to say I'm there, but there's always a temptation to pick up another shift. There's always a
mm,
temptation, a medical director somewhere and be completely overwhelmed with administrative duties outside of your shifts. And so you got to be careful. And I actually have brushed up against the extremes of that trajectory to realize, oh, this is too much. This is not the
wow.
future I want for myself and my family. So it's a balancing act. But yeah, I do a lot of things. But yeah, at the same time, I also intentionally pick tools and opportunities that I can integrate across silos that shouldn't be silos. So everything kind of moves together in concert.
And would you say that the Athos diet is something that anyone can incorporate. Like, they don't have to go out and go out for 20 days and isolate themselves like a monk. They can pretty much
Yeah.
incorporate it right on.
Amen. Exactly. And if anything, I think it will heighten your productivity. It will heighten your mental clarity and your understanding of the virtues and the vices and give you a lot of introspection. What does it cost to not eat 16 to 20 hours a day? If anything, it might actually make you more productive as you're not like endlessly munching during a shift or going to the bathroom all the time because you're dealing with different digestive issues, who knows? But we spend a lot of time prepping for meals, buying food, unpacking the food, prepping the food, cleaning up after the food. It's liberating not to have to go through that 3 times a day. And what do you do with that time instead? And when you realize that a lot of life's hobbies, gains, pastimes are stolen through minutes that last or periods of time that last like a half hour. I mean, me eliminating a little bit of time through food prep and eating is actually I think, allowing me to put in that consistency of that 30-minute window for something that I didn't have before. For example, I mean, you could play this out in many different scenarios, but I think actually and we talked about this last time with the sympathetic nervous system being updriven, serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline, cortisol, all these things are literally giving me more stimulus, more in my day to get stuff done. And it's in a healthy dose and it's in a physiologically balanced way. Yeah. So I feel like it makes me able to be heightened and more productive. That is a free pastime. That is a wonderful, free engineered gift into the world that God has given us to utilize if we choose to use it. Does it feel a little uncomfortable in the beginning? Maybe. But very quickly on, you realize it's such a game changer. And you were talking about this, Vince, last episode about your own experience coming out of COVID. And so, yeah, it's very integratable. And this diet also, by the way, getting your protein from a vegan source, plants in general, I mean, it is in theory cheaper and it is in theory economical. And so I'm not telling everyone to go out and eat grass-fed beef. That's wonderful if you can afford it. But there are billions of people around the world that don't eat meat ever just because of necessity, never mind the rationale. It's just not available. So yeah, I think it's a diet that everyone can integrate in their lives. And that is a theme. I think we all need to be as well-rounded as possible.
Yeah. I want to go into something that I saw and it was funny. I think you made a video about it or you replied. Can't remember exactly, but it was Elon Musk sharing this thing about how when you don't sleep, it's damaging to the brain or to the body or something like that. And you replied something to the effect of, yeah, but for the rest of us normal people, that's why there's coffee or something like that. Can you?
Another person who reminds me of is Brian Johnson. He's doing great things to show people what the perfect healthy life looks like. And it's so bizarre, actually. He doesn't believe in God, but recently he said he's starting his own religion. I think a little bit of it's tongue in cheek, but it is interesting to me that it's inevitable. Like the guy just inevitable as he wrestles with the concepts of death has to incorporate some spiritual perspective. And it's just, you can't ignore that. You just can't ignore that. It's good for him. I hope he becomes a Christian someday. But anyway, the point is this. It's like life happens when you plan. We all wish we could have predictable jobs that end at a certain time and start at a certain time. We wish we could have vacation that lines up perfectly, like all these types of things. But then stuff happens. And for people that work night shifts or third shifts or have to wake up super early to get to work or have some type of job that's a little taxing in some way, that's why there's caffeine. That's why I had to say it. Some people, I think, smoke and do certain drugs because they're coping. I don't know when the last time I met a construction worker who was doing work for my house that didn't look like he probably used something in the evenings every day to cool off. And at the same time, I don't want to be judgmental. Certainly, I don't want people to live in an addicted state and intoxicated. But it seems to be, for some people, like a necessary evil. And I'm not trying to say that there isn't a way to live a sober life, but you could claim that nicotine and caffeine are somewhat low-budget stimulants, especially now you can suck on this stuff for the nicotine, not smoke it. I'm getting into too much detail. But point is that knowing that every time I didn't sleep for a full 8 hours without interruption. Like that's the story of our lives as fathers, as of responsibility who go to work. And I'm sure Elon Musk also probably has had some responsibilities too that have kept him up. But in some ways, I just always like to have that information cushioned with a good dose of reality to make me feel like these people are real and not just robots. And I want to be able to integrate this and utilize this in my life. And I don't want to feel like I'm screwed every time I don't get a full 9 hours of sleep on silk sheets. It's good to know that's the goal. I think it's good to know that is the goal, but I don't want to create a culture where I feel like a victim every time I don't get there. I'd rather just tighten my belt and just keep going forward.
Or when you didn't get your perfect 8 hours of sleep, you're stressing about not getting the 8 hours of sleep, and
Right.
that's doing more
That's a real
damage
thing.
to you.
Oh, that's a real thing. That is a real thing. Yeah. Yeah. And what the rest of us mere mortals do? I will say though, and this was an interesting insight, Vince, two weeks ago, and this is beyond the Athos diet, but I didn't eat the first 3 days of Lent. No food
Oh,
whatsoever.
so you did
There
a
were two.
3 day.
Yeah, I did. And there were two things I found out from this practice. One was that my metabolism never decreased over those 3 days.
Mm,
And what's interesting about that is 30% of our metabolism is just for digestion. So what was I doing with all that energy? And
man.
I think what I was doing is I was healing from inside out. The second thing is I didn't need as much sleep. It was really strange. It started
Mm.
on Sunday night. Sunday night was normal sleep, but Monday and Tuesday night, I probably slept about 4 hours each night. And I do night shifts all the time, and I'm very cognizant of the effects of sleep and not having it. I'll tell you, when I get less than 5 hours of sleep, and I've done hundreds of night shifts, but when I get less than 5 hours of sleep, I am in total fog. I feel like I don't get headaches unless I haven't slept. I feel
Mm.
in a fog, feel out of it. I'm not thinking clearly, et cetera, et cetera. What was so strange was that I got less than 5 hours of sleep. That's my magic number. No brain
Wow.
fog at all. I had energy like nothing else for those next 2 days. And what was so strange was that at 3 p.m., on Wednesday, when the diet was supposed to end, the fasting was supposed to end, because that's when Christ was crucified. He died at the ninth hour. So we stopped at the ninth hour. I was asking myself, my wife, like, should I just keep going? Absolutely phenomenal.
Whoa. Have you ever done any research on, because Jesus fasted for 40 days, 40 nights, right? Have you ever done any research on that? Like a 40-day
I
fast? And
It's something I need to do more on, but I know just from my first passes of this that there is a significant lifetime cancer rate reduction from just one long fast. And
mm,
I'm looking
wow.
towards between 3 and 7 days is the magic time frame. Americans, as I mentioned before, are going to get cancer. Isn't it interesting that even just one long extended fast might reduce your cancer risk like substantial
Oh,
reduction? So yeah, what does 40 days do? I don't know. It doesn't seem to be, as I mentioned, the longest person ever to live without food went over a year. And most Americans, being 60 pounds overweight on average, could easily go 3 months without food. Easily. So I don't
wow.
recommend a 40-day fast. I don't recommend a 7-day fast. I do to think about, and it's probably historic for a reason.
Yeah, yeah. As a Christian, what do you think are some steps the church can take to stay relevant and vibrant in today's, like, for our kids growing up? How can we make it relevant to them with the younger generation who are showing less interest in organized religion? How do you think the church or parents can adapt to keep God relevant?
Yeah, I think in some ways, and I'm probably borrowing from a lot of different speakers that I've heard too over the years about this. One, I think it's important to remember as parents, we're in charge of our kids. And for better for worse, they are absolutely victims of us. I mean, I remember when my son was born, I was like, this little thing, I could put it like in a field and walk away and like nothing would ever, like he wouldn't move. Like
Yeah.
he's completely dependent on everything from me, from us. And so with that said, though, I mean, I'm just doing everything in my power to mold my kids into the worldview that I've rationally evaluated, but also tested. And as far as I can tell, in good faith with good intent, I think that if they do things basic like fast and find a spouse and have a child after they get married and stay married and have children, like their lives will be better. If they go to church, if they have an understanding of what it means to be more precisely right and wrong, it doesn't really help people just to walk up to them and say, lose weight. Like that's not even a topic sentence. And I think sometimes when we say, hey, just be good, we just have no clue what that really means. And so I feel like it's our job as parents and as fathers in particular to really create that recipe for success. And I think we also tend to want our kids to have autonomy, opportunity, because I think it's a vicious cycle. I just think that the family unit has been so destroyed that a lot of people are saying, hey, let this kid do what he needs, what he thinks is right, because everything's wrong in his life. His parents are broken. He's in the wrong neighborhood. He's doing the wrong things. Like he never was given or taught anything. But what's funny is that in 2025, we interpret that situation and say, oh, well, just let's enable his freedom and his autonomy and let him just explore on his own. When really it's, no, bring back marriage, bring back mothers with children and fathers with children, and this routine and ritual that's from a very Christian society historically. And so I think that it's up to us to really mold our children into the apples that don't fall far from the tree. And that's not a bad thing. I wouldn't apologize if my child was tricked into finding a wonderful spouse and staying married, and tricked into learning what it was to work hard and have self-denial. Like, I take full responsibility. No problem.
Yeah, I agree to that. I think sometimes we want to leave it to the school systems or even to the church, but ultimately we're the ones responsible. Those are our
Yeah.
children. We're the ones raising them. And even though the culture is going a certain way or what have you, we can still instill in them those biblical values. Are there other projects that you foresee in the future that you really want to go into? Any other types of diet or any other types of maybe in your spirituality?
If I feel the next step of the Athos Diet, again, this book's been around for about 4 years, and I'm very excited to talk about it, promote it, heal people through it, help them overcome vices and build the virtues through it. But it would be an amazing project to do a documentary on fasting.
Whoa.
Go to bring a group of brothers to Athos, where we interview the monks and the monastics. We try to see what they eat, when they eat, how they understand it from their perspective. I don't want to tell them about sirtuins and BDNF and the sympathetic nervous system. I want them to tell me about how they're overcoming evil and using that with the science. That would be really cool. That would be really cool. That's not a project I'm working on right now, but if there was a team and a crew of travelers and adventurers, man, Vince, we'd have a great time. We would have a great time.
I have goosebumps right now because I'm just imagining it. And, I mean, that I have a background in photo and video, right? So, man, that would be wild. I feel like we just threw it out there and let's see what God does with it.
Yeah.
That would be a crazy project. Yeah, that'd be beautiful.
I know that you have an incredible filming studio for podcasts, and so I just assume that you must have some really incredible skill. If you have a video, you show me the power of your cinematography, man. Maybe we gotta meet sooner than later in Toronto. Let's talk through this. But I think that would be a way to bring alive in sort of a 2024, 2025 kind of setting, audio, video, and bridge these worlds and just try to make a case where we really try to show the spiritual and physical healing of this practice, which, again, I think it's so easy to be like, oh, it's Lent, let's fast, or it's Lent, let's pray. But this is just such a really cool way where it becomes very apparent how that interplay actually exists. It'd be super cool. It'd be super cool. And if you brought your video camera, I wouldn't be surprised if a dragon flew out of a cave in that place. I mean, that's just what's going on there. It's really a beautiful place. It's magical.
Yeah, I was talking to Doug Powell. He's also a best-selling author, Christian apologist, and he stayed there for, I can't remember how long he stayed there for, but he was talking about that spiritual experience that he had. And he's a Presbyterian. And one of the things that he walked away with was, wow, I wish that our denomination could take on some of these practices that they're doing over there. Because after a while of staying there, he really felt connected. And it was interesting how I had a conversation with you, I think a couple of weeks after I interviewed Doug, and I was thinking about that place and how majestic it was. And then you started talking about it as well. That would be wild. That's definitely something that I'm just gonna pray about. And if we can make something like that happen, that would be so cool. Actually, one of my dreams is to make some type of Christian movie or documentary that will really compel people and make them closer to God, draw them closer to God. And I'm just imagining like what an arc would look like in the story, right? What's the plot and what's the major in a documentary? Because we filmed documentaries way back in the Philippines of this orphanage, and there's always a plot and a subplot in terms of, okay, what are the people who are conducting the documentary overcoming? And that would be kind of the hook every time, right? To heighten that story. And oftentimes in documentaries, it happens naturally where, oh, we had an issue with this or something happened with the camera or a natural disaster or something, right? And then there's a hook to that whole story. But then the underlying message would be, hey, like anybody can do this, what these guys are doing, and then pointing out the health benefits of it, the spiritual benefits of it, how it's transformed lives, and then cutting back to people that have gone through it, maybe even interviewing one of the guys who've done it in person, who've lost 100 pounds or something like that, and their life has changed, et cetera, and interlinking this journey to these personal testimonies of how people have changed their lives. Like my creative brain is going wild right now.
Let it fire up, man. I am there with you. It would be cool to have a brainstorm on that. And whether it's like, how do we pose this disaster situation in America where like seemingly everything should be, we should have the healthiest, best looking, excited, happy people in the world. And then like, wait, this is not that at all. What happened? And to find
Mhm.
out maybe there's some like solution to it embedded in this like mystical, magical place where, which of course then brings back and calls back the blessings of Christianity to say, hey, maybe there's a spiritual salve to all of this suffering in the US right now. If only we
Mhm.
could talk, we go to addiction centers. We could try to see if there's a way to incorporate fasting into addiction, meet and maybe meet ascetics. Ask an
Mhm.
ascetic, why is he living to 100 and the anorexic doesn't live past 20? They're both
Wow.
fasting. What's the difference? Which is
Mm.
a lot
Wow,
of
that's a
spin.
good question.
And so anyway, man, yeah, Vince, that would be a project I think would be really a blessing to be able to work on. That would be something.
Yeah. Whoa, let's see. That's something I'm gonna be praying about, man. So with the Athos diet, with the intermittent fasting portion, there's the fasting portion, there's the feasting portion. And one of the things that we talk about in pastoral ministry, one of the things that one of my mentors talked to me about, he's a pastor, and he said, how does the church get into this rhythm? How do you get into this weekly rhythm, this monthly rhythm? How do you get into the rhythm with your family? Like for you, for example, you have this rhythm with your kids, with your family, where you go out to Greece for 2 weeks, and for them growing up, this is like a rhythm for them, right? And it creates balance, it creates structure, it creates consistency, creates something that they can look forward to. Do you think that this rhythm of fasting and eating, fasting and feasting versus the 3 times rhythm, right? Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Do you think that this reflects more Christian living? Do you find that spiritually, physically, mentally, like you said, time-wise, you have more time, you're cleaning up less, you're preparing less. Do you think that this rhythm is more reflective and beneficial for Christian living?
Yeah, I think what's really cool about it is it's how do you align every cell in your body to the highest good? We all try to say,
Mm,
hey, it has to have an aim. And why don't we
yeah.
aim that to Jesus? Why don't we aim that to truth and goodness and beauty? And absolutely. But isn't it interesting that we can actually align even ourselves? Like truly the
Wow.
rhythm of famine in the celebrations of the church and its fasting and feasting. Let's all have that synchronized. That's an incredible opportunity. We all get books and different things, thesis memos that say, hey, let's go here, let's do that in honor of such and such. But to actually then change my physiology for God, that's a pretty powerful opportunity. I'll say this again, the monks at Mount Athos oftentimes break their fast at the ninth hour, which is when Christ was crucified, when he died on the ninth hour. So that's a special time.
Mm,
That's 3 every day. That you might say, isn't it interesting that correlates with, hey, if I start working at 5 or 6 in the morning and I'm like just knocking it out of the park with work and productivity and doing this and that, but well, by 3 p.m., it's time to break the fast, rest. Christ was suffering all day. It's time to rest with Christ as he's in the tomb. Okay,
mm,
and then
wow.
this, yeah, and then at the same time, as I say, we're literally changing our physiology in a cadence that matches the church. One of the reasons we fast on Wednesdays and Fridays is because Wednesdays when Christ was betrayed,
Mm,
historically known as a Wednesday, and Friday he was crucified.
mm,
And then Sunday was interesting. The church made Sunday day of rest. Even in the Jewish pastime, that should have been Saturday, they shifted it to
yeah.
Sunday. Now all of the community is feasting and resting on Sunday. All of the community is
Mm,
a little bit more fervently on Wednesdays and Fridays and reminding themselves as to why that is. Yeah, I think that does lead to a Christian family and society and rhythm. And we can use that to echo Christ in our very physiology. That's what it means to me.
all right. And you personally, do you also will end your fast at 3 p.m.?
Oftentimes that's my goal. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
try to go to 6 p.m. It depends, but yeah, oftentimes, especially during Great Lent, a time where I feel that I join many others who are
Mm,
trying to get that moment. And again, the window can, to some extent, be arbitrarily fastened to whatever anchor you want. So
mhm.
here, it's like a little extra boost to know that it's me coordinating and synchronizing with Christ's suffering and his efforts in my small way. But yeah,
Yeah.
the ninth hour is 3 p.m.
Wow. In people that study metaphysics, they talk about how we're one and we're all connected. And I can imagine that even metaphysically, to join other believers in this moment, right? A bunch of followers of Jesus Christ breaking that fast. in that moment. I'm sure there is some type of also metaphysical benefit to that. And in the same manner as we can all have a relationship with God on our own, but when you go to church and you join that fellowship, you break bread together, you take of the cup together. That's different than doing something at home by yourself, isolated, because you're joining that metaphysical reality.
It reminds me, I had a brother of mine, I turned 40 last year, and I went on a trip somewhere, and he couldn't make the trip, unfortunately. And we had this incredible time on this trip. And a week later, I had celebrated my birthday. So that was like, check. I had my schedule coordinated for that trip. I had my budget coordinated for that trip. I had a certain level of bandwidth and responsibilities that I was trying to clear out before and then catch up afterwards. And when I came back and my brother hadn't gone on that trip and he too was also turning 40, he was completely out of sync with me.
This is your twin brother, right? Because I know you said you have a twin brother. Yeah.
Yes. He was completely out of sync. He didn't spend the money on the same trip. He wanted to spend on something else now. He didn't get rest for a week doing something adventurous. His cup was not yet full. Been working through that week, not in preparation of that week. And so when I started ramping up to start working even harder when I came, he was like still like at neutral to winding down. And so in some ways, I feel like the metaphysical speech to what you're bringing up, I think is a really good point. It's almost like when we all do things together, we don't even know the second, third order effects that surround that decision, that as we start all breaking the fast at 3 p.m. or all start celebrating Easter at the same time, how all of society starts to prepare for that moment. And then I'm there with them. And I'm in the same way that they are as a result of that synchronization. And if you're not synchronized, how that can really just make everything disjointed, so that when I start celebrating, he's still in famine. I've spent hasn't. I've met the needs, he hasn't. Anyway, I feel like it's the same sort of relevant example, maybe something a little wouldn't it be interesting if there's ways that we can't quite measure yet, where us all getting to the 9th hour makes the difference, and us celebrating Easter at the same day makes a difference? Yeah, I think there's some coordination and synchronization there that has some effects that is tough to measure, but it has an effect.
I'm really interested in that, because that's something like what you're saying. In the future, what if we had the instruments to measure that, right? And you can see what happens maybe to the body, or maybe even if you can measure certain things. Like I'm thinking right now about how before we didn't know that forgiveness had a physiological effect and that anger had a physiological effect. Now we know psychologically it does. We didn't know that love in a community sociologically creates healthier people and less mental health happening. And these are things that the Bible has been teaching us for 2,000 years. These are the things that Jesus has been teaching us for millennia. And now psychology is catching up to those things. Oh, it's actually healthy to forgive someone. It's actually healthy to not hold bitterness. It's actually healthy to receive forgiveness. And we know that now. We couldn't measure it before psychologically. We couldn't measure it before sociologically, or even neurologically and biologically. Now we can. We know the physiological stress of being bitter and holding on to anger and what that does to the immune system. I wonder as well, rhythms like that, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you should know too that 80% of all of our genes are regulated on light and when we eat. And even when it comes down to things like, what's the greatest cycle of all time? It's the menstrual cycle. I mean, if every day we go through the circadian rhythm based on eating and seeing light, how does that then scale up to affecting fertility in women, as they aren't on a certain rhythm or ritual? It would make sense to me that the daily cycle would give some type of effect on a monthly cycle. And that has to do with beginnings of life itself. There are more and more families, actually, a lot of more couples that are actually infertile. That's defined as wanting to have a kid and can't have it after a year of trying. But I think a lot of it comes down to the environment that we surround ourselves in and the food that we eat and when we eat. But you're absolutely right. And then that again, it speaks to this different spiritual issue of, in a society that isn't materialistic and isn't about instant convenience and isn't about filling every impulse mindlessly. How does that manifest? And we know the result. It's great to have Walmart and gas stations open 24/7, but it also speaks to even the idea that we would have that. I want you to be open 24/7. And it's funny, I wonder sometimes, like the ERs, there didn't used to be ERs. In fact, the ER is a somewhat modern concept. It was developed 70, 80 years ago. And I'm thinking to
Ah,
myself, what did they do at 3 o'clock in the morning when I have a whole huge amount of patients every night? Like, where do these people look cut? And I don't know.
right.
I just didn't seek it, or they coped. But this 24/7 culture sometimes is our own worst enemy. We put it on ourselves to be available and to, but again, it speaks to your point earlier, which is, wow, we can finally measure this stuff and think of it in a different manner. And there's like a paradigm shift for better, for worse. Yeah, it's just very interesting times in this data age where we can measure everything about us. We wear our watches and our Apple watches, et cetera, and how many people come in with information that may or may not
Mhm.
be, but it does make you grateful. There's this one disease called Takotsubo's, and essentially it means broken. It's a broken heart syndrome. So literally, it was discovered in widows. Women lose their husbands, and they go into congestive heart failure. So they didn't have a history of congestive heart failure before. They don't have risk factors. The only thing
Huh.
you explain it, literally, they're in grief, and their heart doesn't pump as strong. They overload with fluid, and you have to treat them as if they suddenly have a problem that didn't exist before. And what is the explanation? A loss of love, a grief. There is absolutely a psychosomatic connection. And I feel even in my own youth, like I used to roll my eyes over any of these connections, like, oh, this is all so emotional, has no effect. No, it does. It absolutely does. I've seen them firsthand. The heart, the body keeps the score, and the heart is just one example of many illnesses where, people who are in terrible grief, their body shows it. You can see it on ultrasound. You can measure it with a pro-BNP. You can treat it with Lasix. It's a disease starting out from the sorrows of grief. Who knew?
What is pro-BNP?
It's just a molecule that we look at, tells us if the heart is overloaded with fluid. It increases as the heart weakens and as more and more heart fluid gets backed up in the heart and the lungs.
And when you fast, it decreases the BNP?
Oh, actually, so that's a BDNF. BDNF.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But this was
BDNF.
yeah, BDNF. But actually, blood pressure does drop when you fast or in a fasted state. Cholesterol does drop when you're fasting. You can eat the same exact foods, and if you just eat them over an intermittent fasting window, your lipid profile will improve. Your insulin sensitivity will improve. Everything improves, and it's all because of these molecules. Like I said, BDNF.
What is BDNF again?
I don't know what the acronym is. I think it's brain naturopath derived protein or something. I'll have to Google it, but it's certainly present in high levels in healthy people, and low levels in the neurodegenerative disorders.
Okay.
There's sirtuins. There's 7 of them. They get upregulated to heal literally your DNA. Long to improve the mitochondria when you're in a fasted state. They're so effective. They're so powerful that actually they're huge areas of interest for pharmaceutical companies. They're looking into how to mimic these and manipulate them for cancer treatments.
Interesting.
All of this is like God's gift to us when we fast. Autophagy, apoptosis, all these things get upregulated with fasting. It's just, like I said, it's just God's salve for suffering. And it's just like only said 77 times. I keep telling you what to do, and you're 77 times, 78 times. Like I'd say it's 77 times if someone's still not listening. But I didn't mention this before, but aspirin, depending on what source you look at, when someone has a heart attack, one of the basic standard of care steps is to give them an aspirin. In fact, you get flipped on it. If you have these different regulatory bodies that, hey, this person had a STEMI, that is a heart attack. Did you give them aspirin? And what's so funny about aspirin is that it's like the number needed to treat to make an actual difference in this person's life and in their course of disease is like 1 in 40.
Wow.
40 people have a heart attack and give each one of them aspirin to have one of them actually get a benefit from me doing that. Yet that's standard of care. And my point is, it's like fasting, the number needed to treat is not 40, it's like 1. Every person that does it is a benefit. And if I could create a drug that every time I gave them that drug, they would get benefit, that's a powerful drug.
Yeah.
And it's just fasting 101, something we got to take seriously.
What is, okay, you mentioned autophagy, and that's when the body's healing itself, right?
Yeah.
It's getting rid of older cells and it's replacing
yeah, it's the entire cells, but usually it's more like the organelles within the cell. Recycle old proteins, getting rid of bad proteins, like getting rid of mitochondria that are unfunctional, optimizing mitochondria. So that's more, it's an interest kind of process. Then there's apoptosis. And apoptosis is the process of cells dying on their own. It's programmed death. Cells burn out after a while, and you don't want them turning into cancer. You want them being functional It's an interesting thing. When people talk about cancer, they describe it in many different ways, but I like to describe it in two different ways. Cancer is a process of unregulated growth. There's just too much growth, and it's an identity crisis. So the cell doesn't know what type of function it is. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'll be this cell, I'll be that cell, and it starts creating cells that really have no clear purpose, which is interesting. One of the worst diseases to mankind is something that's too much growth and has no
Mm.
identity.
Wow.
If you take a person with breast cancer and you keep them alive and you look at the cells of the cancer from, let's say, day one of finding it to 5 years later, oftentimes those cells look completely different. They've just expanded and replicated into nonsense. Yeah, and I think there's probably two things that are most startling to human psychology. It's what's your identity? That's a big question.
Mhm.
Humans with that. How do you feel? How does your life function when you don't know your identity? When you don't know
Mhm.
your gender, something is basic. A lot of bad things can happen. And then growth, it's not always good to expand. And ambition can be a big problem. And taking on too much can be a big problem, or wanting too much, or having too much need for gluttony, or that is what gluttony is. It's just such a fascinating thing, the mimicking of the micro to the macro and these fractals that kind of get bigger qualities and characteristics at scale. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, I was thinking about that as well in terms of our society right now and how almost, I don't know if it's mainstream media or whatever programming and indoctrination we're getting in the schools or in universities, colleges, but there's always this push to identify beyond God, right? Oh, identify to your sex, identify to your gender, identify to your race, identify to your work, right? Oh, I'm a
Yep.
doctor, or I'm black, I'm white, I'm Asian, I'm gay, I'm straight, I'm trans. And when there is this growth, but the identity is confused and it's not
Mm.
based off of reality, right? Our identity as imago Dei, uh, beings created in the image of God, right? With
Mm.
having that inherent value. But then now we're identifying not to the creator, but to the created things. And then how society really, there's confusion in society, right? And destruction. And that includes with our bodies, with the relationships, with government, everything else, right?
Yeah. No, those fractals, that's great.